Why should Kazakhstan corporates consider listing in Asian exchanges such as Hong Kong and Singapore?
I mean, Kazakhstan is very close to China and to Asia, and a number of companies in Kazakhstan actually do business with Asian countries, and especially in China. So obviously there is an angle of Asian story to these companies. So obviously looking to Hong Kong, looking to Singapore stock exchanges is another alternative for a number of these companies to raise capital.
Apart from IPOs, what are the other possible avenues for fundraising by Kazakhstan corporates in Asia?
A number of private companies actually can look into the private placement options. So typically, raising equity, whether it's with strategic partners or with a number of institutional investors or sovereign wealth funds, in the pre-IPO type situations where capital is needed, but the company is not yet ready for the IPO, but needs capital for development and the know-how. So obviously, the private placement is one part. Going for more sophisticated structures on the debt side or structured finance side. So, for example, looking at the pre-IPO convertible bond structures. And that's typically more applicable to the large companies, so the companies that are owned by government assets and so on, where they can raise capital in exchange, obviously, at the IPO happening at a later time, giving investors a chance to come into the deal or invest in the company before the transaction happens, thereby raising capital earlier, but attracting these investors also in the earlier stages of development. So that typically would be private placement, as I mentioned, or the different structures such as pre-IPO convertible bonds.
Okay, good. Many of the Kazakh companies depend on China for their business, especially exports. How would a possible slowdown in the Chinese economy affect the prospects for these companies?
Well, even though a number of companies do trade and have very strong trade links with China, especially in the commodities industry, so oil and gas, metals and mining, they're not entirely dependent on China. So obviously it is important pie, and it's increasing rapidly. I mean, in the last 10 years, the exports into Asia and China in particular increased double time, I mean, from 10 to 20% overall into Asia. So obviously that has some impact to some of these companies, but most of the companies, as we mentioned, are in the commodities, and that depends on the global cycles of commodity prices. So they're more tuned to the swings in the commodity prices rather than to the slowdown in China. And in effect, as we mentioned, also Kazakhstan is in between Russia, China, Middle East is not that far away, India. A number of resources are being used by these countries, even though when the slowdown happens in China, there is a considerable demand still for a number of resources among all of these countries. So Kazakhstan is, in effect, geopolitically located to supply these and continue supplying it without, let's say, effective slowdown in China. But as I mentioned, I mean, it's more the global commodity price swings rather than specific growth rates in China or any other economy.